The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is brought to you by Trojan Condoms. Experience more with Trojan Bearskin Raw, America's thinnest latex condom among leading brands. Enjoy triple-tested Trojan quality with a natural feel for your most thrilling adventure yet. Trojan Raw is also available in non-latex, designed to increase body heat transfer between partners. Trojan Bearskin Raw. Let's go. Tap the banner to buy now.
The Athletic.
Three riders crashing from the sprint race lead, a retirement announcement and a fairy tale win, a super intelligent Sunday win from the champion after a rather less impressive Sunday last lap disaster, more Marquez midfield to podium heroics. MotoGP's Catalan Grand Prix weekend had something for everyone. It ended with Jorge Martin holding a 39-point championship lead over Pecco Bagnaia, 1 more point advantage than he had before the weekend. But rather a lot happened in between to make that lead 1 point bigger. And all of that is what Simon Patterson and Khorounzhiy are here with me, Matt Beer, to rattle through on the Race MotoGP podcast this week. I'm going to throw a 1-sentence challenge at you two that I've not let you prepare for, but I just feel like there were so many storylines from this weekend without like one big standout. So, Simon, as we sit here recording on Monday morning, what is your one big "this sticks in my mind" takeaway from Barcelona?
I mean, the thing we're going to remember from this weekend in 10 years' time is going to be Aleix Espargaro's retirement. The announcement that this is his final season, that'll be the thing that we take away from this weekend, because at the minute MotoGP is delivering title turns and good racing every weekend, and I think that even by the end of the season, this weekend will have faded into another great race weekend. But in Valencia, it's going to be Aleix's departure that we're talking about. I
love the fact that he's done so well in his career that would now remember his retirement announcement 10 years later, which is definitely not what you would have said when he was like back in Moto 2 after that abortive first start. I mean, we'll get into his retirement announcement, what it means for the championship and how he'll be missed and everything around him in the middle section of this podcast, definitely. Val, what is your "this sticks in my mind" 1-sentence takeaway from Barcelona right now?
Yeah, it'd be something like everything happened, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Because I look at the points and I see no difference. I look at obviously the races were very entertaining, but it feels like a reruns of stuff we've already seen this season. and that ultimately had no impact whatsoever on the point standings for the top three. I mean, they are where they are. Pecco did what he does. Jorge Martin did what he does. Marc Marquez did what he did the previous weekend also. It just feels like it was good, but it was a filler episode, if that makes any sense.
That bodes really well for this season, that we've got a filler episode in which the champion throws away a race win on the very last lap with a crash that my main takeaway from the Bagnaia crash, in fact, my main takeaway from the weekend, is how he managed to balance the bike upside down in the gravel so neatly after that crash. Like, most crash pictures afterwards, the bike's all over the place, but it was like so neatly perched upside down. But yeah, let's start with Pecco Bagnaia's weekend, because he was one of 3 riders to crash out of the sprint race lead. We'll touch on the others in a second as well, but what on earth happened in Bagnaia's crash, Simon? Because he was under no pressure, the sprint win was in his pocket, there was no track contamination or anything that we know of. How does he end up with his bike upside down in the gravel at that point?
I mean, there was no track contamination, but there was kind of the inherent track contamination that comes from racing at Barcelona, because it's a super low grip circuit that probably needs resurfacing. And you know, when temperatures go up, we tend to see this happen. I think it's probably, well, it is telling that he was the 3rd race leader to do the same thing in a very short sprint race, because obviously things were a bit sketchy and a bit tricky. It's worth noting that now, really, you know, these sprint races are the first time that anyone pushes hard at that time of the afternoon when the temperature goes up all weekend, because apart from trying to stick in a quick lap at the very, very end of Friday practice, you know, you're not having a hot weather super competitive session like, say, qualifying would have been in 2021 or 2022. And I think that, you know, essentially he just got caught out by it, as did Raul Fernandez, as did Brad Binder earlier in the same race. One of the most telling lines about Barcelona all weekend was someone asked Aleix Espargaro about the track conditions on Friday, I think, and about, you know, how greasy and slippery it was, knowing that he's normally the guy that kind of speaks up on these things, that is the bit of the safety advocate. And he admitted that if it wasn't his home race, he'd hate it. But, you know, he admitted kind of that he has a bit of inherent bias to it, and that's probably the only reason that he doesn't moan about it more. Bagnaia just got wiped out with it, just got caught out in those conditions.
Do you think we should quickly tick off the other guys who crashed out of the sprint lead, because it was another bizarre sprint race, and the common denominator, or rather the outlier, was Bagnaia, because to me there was no reason other than what you just outlined, Simon, for him to crash out of a lead, whereas Raul Fernandez, who went down on lap 5 while leading, and Brad Binder, who went down on lap 7, both had reasons to crash out of the lead, because Raul Fernandez is under such pressure to prove that he should be in MotoGP and live up to this big reputation that he had for those few minutes in the middle of the season he was signed for MotoGP. And Brad Binder's had an awful run lately, and both of those were guys who would have had reasons to be a bit nervous about getting the job done once they came into the race lead. So let's just quickly check on their weekends. Val, Raul Fernandez, where did that come from? Because he was quick in the main race as well, but that pace to lead, we just have not seen that from him in MotoGP.
Well, he was quick in the main race, but he was quick in qualifying, which he will argue made his weekend. And, you know, his argument through the weekend was, look, guys, this is how it is when I finally qualify. Okay, I have the race pace to hang in there. Which I think is sometimes true, sometimes maybe not so true, but it is clear that qualifying conditions so much of everybody's weekend, and Raul's weekend in particular, also because he's not really on a bike that's super known for easily overtaking people. My theory, and I don't really have a lot of great evidence for this, I think the 23 Aprilia was really good this weekend, as it was in 2023 in Aleix's and Maverick Vinales' hands. And the 24 Aprilia at this track specifically isn't a real step. That was my suspicion, and I struggle to really verify it. It's hard to compare lap times necessarily because of different track temperatures between the years, and obviously the different Michelin carcass and stuff like that. But Aleix at one point admitted that in the final sector, the more downforcey new Aprilia just can't do what Fernandez's 23 Aprilia is doing. And I think just generally, Aleix loves this track so much. He's so good here. He's so fast here. He maybe potentially is the best or the second best rider here as far as, specifically Barcelona is concerned. I think maybe only Fabio Quartararo is better. And he barely beat Raul Fernandez. And I don't think he was going to beat him in the sprint if Fernandez didn't chuck it down the road. So I don't know. I think it's the 23 bike. Genuinely, I think the 24 Aprilia has become more of an all-rounder, which means it is no longer the super weapon it is on low grip circuits like Barcelona. Maybe. That's where I am.
We're also relatively early in the season to be coming to Barcelona because it's been on a September date for a couple of years. So the idea of a bike that was so good there last year carrying over that form does make some sense, given where everything else is development-wise as well. Simon, do you think this is... Okay, so there's Val's argument this might be circuit-specific, but this will make a difference to Fernandez generally, won't it, showing this sort of pace? Do you see him kind of coming on stronger at Mugello next weekend as well, or is this a one-off?
I'm not entirely convinced it's circuit-specific in the kind of the grander scheme of things. I get Val's point, but I think that there's also an element here of this being... this is kind of the realization of the potential that we've seen for a long time, and yes, maybe it took the specific circuit this weekend to make that happen, these specific conditions. But I think this is kind of what we expected from him for a long, long time. So, it might not translate directly to Mugello. It might, because it might turn out that one of the elements that's been missing all along was confidence, and that this is, giving him what he needs to be up there inside his own head. It's hard to say if we're going to see this happen in Mugello. It's hard to say if we're going to see it happen next week, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see it more and more this season.
I mean, he's not felt like he's been under perhaps the rider market pressure he should be, given his results, because Aprilia Trackhouse have got enough faith in the potential that he has and the lap times that he has shown on occasion. But it certainly won't hurt, will it? So 2 laps after he went down, Brad Binder went down from the lead as well. And he's someone else who suddenly sort of seems to have been drawn into the 2025 rider market, despite having a contract with KTM that lasts until the next century. Slightly strange situation around his future right now, and quite a lot of pressure on him after what Pedro Acosta's been doing on that bike recently, who you both shot your hands up when we talked about Binder and the rider market. I think Val won by about a tenth of a second.
Well, because, the more I think about it, my takeaway memory from the weekend is KTM's Pit Byrer admonishing the media a little bit when talking to MotoGP's broadcast about the things he said to Germany's Motorsport magazine about his current riders being under pressure, and specifically what he said about Augusto Fernandez and Jack Miller not delivering at quite a MotoGP level, at the level for their current MotoGP seats, is I think what he meant. And I think he took issue with the fact that the rest of that quote, but like, we're still behind them, they're still our preference, etc., was omitted. But that's, that's modern sports. That's the part that will stick out, because the rest of it is almost default, if that makes any sense. That's just how people talk right now. Anyway, he said that moments after being asked directly, is Brad Binder going to be in KTM Orange next year? And going, I don't know, we have contract flexibility, which is the much more important part. And they'll be thinking about that contract flexibility when they saw Binder chuck it down the road from the lead on Saturday. They'll be thinking about it on Sunday, where he just wasn't there, wasn't fast. He was, when I say wasn't fast, let's be honest, he was really slow. Really, really a bad race. He did bring home the points at least, but he was a bit of a horror show.
Blamed a bad tire.
He's still, like, the good news for Brad Binder is he's still the second least of KTM's problems, for obvious reasons, because 2 of the other guys had just complete write-offs of a weekend. But I mean, he shouldn't have crashed in that moment, because then Sunday brought nothing. And it does feel like he is making a lot of mistakes, isn't he? Like that Brad Binder from a couple of years back, who you could rely on to bring home the points that were on the table, on offer. That guy isn't there right now, and KTM needs him to come back, because that is a big portion of his selling point. He's not going to be your best qualifier. He's maybe not going to be your best guy in terms of peak pace. He's probably not got that upper reach of just what the hell's going on speed that Pedro Acosta will have. So he should be the guy who's bringing points into your coffers every weekend. And 12 were gone in the sprint. And in the race, once Acosta crashed out. Well, he didn't crash out, crashed.
He didn't crash up. So you're right to say crash down.
He did crash down, not out, technically.
Yeah. True.
And he didn't crash out because he finished.
Yeah. That's the part that gave me pause, because I am insufferable like that. But he wasn't there to pick up the slack. He wasn't there. He was already out of that lead group, and he didn't have the pace. And there's always going to be mitigating circumstances, and you look at every session individually, and there's going to be some reason for why things didn't go right. But just the evidence is piling up that this is not a great season, isn't it? And the chances of things going wrong over and over and over again at a certain point, you have to start having question marks about what the rider is doing, which I think is fair enough. I think he accepts that too.
I mean, the reason that there's contract talk about Brad Binder for next season isn't because he's suddenly like feeling under pressure. He isn't suddenly under pressure because there's contract talk. There's contract talk because he's not been performing. That's the reality. He's been not the Brad Binder that we've come to expect over the past few years, and I can absolutely understand why KTM, with their usual bullish pig-headedness, have decided to try and light a bit of a fire under him, because that's their approach to rider management. I think it's quite funny that Pit Buyer, the sort of the non-native English speaking team boss in the paddock, who speaks the best English of any of them, and probably better than some of the native English speakers, has once again been mistranslated and misquoted, whenever we all know that that's not the case. It's just the excuse that KTM roll out every time that Pitt says something controversial. And as Val pointed out, he did it literally 30 seconds before he then complained about people mistranslating him and misquoting him. It's just the way that KTM treat their riders. From what we understand, I think this is just a bit of lighting a fire under Binder, though, because there are no realistic opportunities to replace him. They're going to put a bit of a pitch to Marquez and a bit of a pitch to Martin, but I think both of those guys are probably going to stay at Ducati, and Binder's probably going to keep his space alongside Pedro Acosta next year. Even if he isn't quite performing the way that he needs to be this year. At the end of the day, they're in a position where over the last few years, Brad Binder has been key to the team, because he's been their superstar, their number one, the guy that's leading the way and winning races for them. And guess what? Next year, he's going to be Jack Miller. He's going to be the second level rider, the guy that's there to do the development work, because they've found someone newer and faster in Pedro Acosta anyway. He's I think he's done enough to save himself, but he's also kind of made him became a bit redundant all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, I should say I don't think the KTM comments got a bit of pushback when they came out, and specifically, I think you could see Miller discuss it to MotoGP.com, and was just with a stone face and very unhappy about it. Clearly, very unimpressed. Maybe I don't love the idea of just flaunting the fact you can swap riders between teams willy-nilly. I don't think that shouldn't be the case. That doesn't feel right to me from a rider contract perspective. If you contract a rider for a team, they have to be in that team. I don't like the idea of contracting them across several seats and then just deciding what to do. I don't like it when Red Bull does it in F1, and I do not like it when KTM does it here.
When Red Bull does it in MotoGP.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, fair enough. But like Jack Miller and Augusto Fernandez can have no complaints on what Pit Buyer is saying. Zero. Less than zero. Jack Miller has less than 1/3 of the points Pedro Acosta has, and Pedro Acosta spent the last two Grand Prix chucking his bike down the road, and he's still more than 3 times the points of Miller. You can't be annoyed about it, and Augusto Fernandez isn't annoyed about it. You hear him talk about it, he fully understands. Yeah, I'm slow right now. They can fire me, and they will if I am like this. And it's not really helping his performance, I guess, that attitude, but I appreciate it. There can be no hard feelings there. You cannot be scoring these points and keep these seats. These are good seats.
Well, I don't get the impression that any of the 3 relatively struggling KTM riders are doing it because they can't be bothered to do better, or that they particularly need pressure to be put on them or anything. That if they could solve their problems, they they would do. And, Binder should have enough grace from 3 or 4 years of overachievement to be allowed a bit of a blip. Now, the worry is just that how much better Acosta looks, and Binder being below his own standard is a concern if you are going to a title fight next year.
There is one question mark about what you just said, though, Matt. Maybe Binder hasn't been overperforming and over-delivering on this bike the last 3 years. Maybe the bike's better than we thought, and Pedro Acosta's showing the real level. And there has to be people inside KTM having that thought at the minute as well. Maybe the level of the bike is higher than the 3 riders they've had on it.
Yeah, that's a thought I've had. I've probably voiced on this over the last few months as well. But it's not even like Binder's doing what he was doing last year, and Acosta is actually beating the Ducatis to race wins. And there's like 2 places ahead of where Binder's default has been. Binder's 2024 form is rubbish compared to most of what Binder has done.
Yeah.
The last few years.
Binder hasn't done a lot of beating the Ducatis either, though.
Yeah,
Binder hasn't won a race in 3 years.
But it's not a question of. Also, Simon, you shouldn't say that when you say that sprint race wins should count as wins, and then go, but Binder hasn't won anything
but they don't
in 3
right
years.
now. But they don't right now.
But you can't hold those two opinions at the same time. And my point is just that I see also the same thing Matt says. Like, Binder has had moments where he's like suspiciously slow, and that gives you pause about last year's form. But he's also just chucking the bike down the road, and that's the part that you can't really compare to 2022 specifically, when he wasn't doing that. In 2023, where he was doing a bit of that, but not at this absurd rate.
Yeah, this is it. Okay, he hasn't beaten Ducatis to a lot of Grand Prix race wins, admittedly, but Pecco Bagnaia has been able to look sideways and see Binder going wheel to wheel with him quite often. Now he's just got to look over his shoulder and go, is that Binder crashing behind me in the distance somewhere? That's what's different about Binder's 2024. And what Acosta's doing is what's making it look so dramatic. We otherwise would be going, KTM's lost the plot this year, but because of what Pedro Acosta's doing, we're doing the opposite.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
Awaken your senses with a curiously refreshing Hendrick's Cucumber Lemonade.
Curious how?
Cue the aroma.
Marvelous.
Cue the taste.
Magnificent.
Cue the cucumber.
That's the refreshing secret.
Hendrick's is uncommonly crafted with cucumbers, roses, artistry, and imagination. Other gins are ordinary, but Hendrick's is
refreshingly curious.
Discover Hendrick's Gin cocktail recipes at hendricksgin.com. Please drink the unusual responsibly. Hendrick's Gin, 44% alcohol by volume. Bottled and imported by William Grant & Sons, New York, New York. Copyright 2024.
And speaking of Pedro Acosta, he was right at the front again in the Sunday race, crashed again, but actually he was really important to Pecco Bagnaia's victory. And I think you both have a theory that Pecco made very intelligent use of Acosta to defeat Jorge Martin.
It's not often that I completely accurately call a race from like 1/3 or 1/4 distance, but it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. Acosta was faster in the early stages of the race than Pecco Bagnaia, partly because he had a soft rear tyre on. Pecco Bagnaia has seen what Pedro Acosta can do in the early parts of races and knows that it definitely doesn't always mean that he's going to see the checkered flag in the position he's in at the halfway point. And Jorge Martin wanted to lead the race. So Pecco Bagnaia let Pedro Acosta do all the hard work for him of putting Martin under pressure. Meant at the end of the race, his tyres were fresher and he just chipped away at even after Acosta crashed out, he just chipped away at Martin's lead. You know, textbook stuff from Bagnaia, absolutely perfect tyre management. He knew what he was doing. He knew that he would be able to be there at the end if the two of them went hammer and tongs at the front. I think if Acosta had still been there, if he hadn't crashed, he would have finished third anyway because, Bagnaia would have just dismissed two of them. The way that whenever you compare Le Mans and how good Martin was at defending from Bagnaia compared to how easily Bagnaia went past him at Montmello, he had so much left in the bag at the end of that race. He just absolutely textbook, the kind of the doviness of Bagnaia that we've talked about in the past in terms of how he can manage races and manage tyres. That was like the case study in it.
Let's bring some receipts from our work chat. Val, don't love this for Martin. Wonder if he's being peer pressured into an untenable pace. A few minutes later, Simon, Bagnaia is going to win this. Val, that is my feeling as well. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sometimes we're not so bad. I think it was pretty obvious that Bagnaia was just hitting the lap time he wanted to hit, which is that low 1 minute 40. And Martin was being forced by Acosta to run high 1 minute 39s that ideally he would not have run. And it ended the way it ended. Acosta had the crash in pursuit that he initially put down to some sort of issue on the front of the bike, although mentions of that disappeared from their post-race press release. So I don't know. There's a chance that it was just an error. I think we'll find out more when he speaks to the media next time around.
I think it's more a case of KTM not putting bad news in their press release and just editing out the fact that their bike broke.
That's also really plausible. But we'll have to see. But in any case, we saw it coming, and as soon as Acosta went down, basically the gap began slowly but surely to go towards Bagnaia, and everybody saw what was coming. And if anything, I honestly felt Martin, given his early pace, held up kind of good. Here's what I'm trying to say by that. I'm not actually sure I believe that Acosta cost Martin the race, because I don't think Martin was winning it. I don't really see a scenario in which if Jorge Martin lets Acosta go, then it's the same outcome of being overtaken by Bagnaia, but just Bagnaia has less of a gap to close and maybe less of a pace advantage, but he still goes through. If Martin lets Bagnaia stay ahead, then Bagnaia just manages it from where he is. It's just that kind of race I'm not convinced was really winnable for him this weekend. I don't think he quite had the pace longevity, and it's really just not his trick. The saving the tires. He didn't burn them up completely. He was there in the mix. He finished close enough. They were both daylight clear of everybody else. I think he did really well. I don't think he should beat himself up over the Acosta part of the strategy, because I don't believe this is not what he has in his locker necessarily. I don't think so. Not in Barcelona. I don't think so. I think Bagnaia was going to have this always.
I think I'm even more proud of one of my receipts. At 2:17, which is about 12 laps into the race, I tweeted to say, letting Acosta hunt Martin is in Bagnaia's best interests. The rookie looks better placed to push Martin to a pace that might be uncomfortable later in the race, and it might mean that Bagnaia is in a position to swoop. We called that one well, didn't we? Acosta's still got learning to do, but the great thing about the kid is that he does whatever he does. He makes his mistakes, and then he just goes, we'll do better than that next time, because he can, because he's a rookie. But there's less and less of them. He's getting more and more complete a package right now, and it will come as no surprise whatsoever to anyone that has listened to the podcast at all this season that I am even more of the opinion now than I was a few weeks ago or a few months ago that KTM should switch them at the summer break. Because what is Miller achieving right now for KTM apart from crash damage? Nada. Pedro Acosta can be a title contender next year. All the bits are there right now to make that happen, especially if he doesn't have to learn early in the season a new team and stuff like that, because there's going to be loads of other movement coming over the winter break. We are going to see, Marc Marquez on a new bike. Probably we're going to see Jorge Martin in a new team. Probably there will be changes coming. Just get this guy onto the new machine right away, onto the new team right away. Let him do all that work. Whenever KTM have the flexibility, we think, to make that sort of change right away, just let him. Just give him a 6-month head start, and the rest, why not?
One thing you said that I disagree with. You said can be a title contender last in the next year. I think must be, has to be. That has to be the KTM plan.
True.
Not to put too much pressure on him, but that's at this point that is what.
He doesn't do pressure. It's fine. You and I are not going to put pressure in this guy. That's one of his strengths.
So if we're keeping receipts from the work chat at this point in the race, I was following it on the work chat from being sat in my car because my son had fallen asleep and I was trying to preserve the end of his nap before going in to watch the rest of the race. And I was watching you two chat about it, and my anticipation was that I'd be coming in to see Acosta and Martin probably colliding with each other, or Martin disappearing down the field having rooted his tyres, or crashing trying to pass Acosta. But Martin had a really, really, really sensible weekend, and that's why his championship lead is still intact. Wasn't the fastest guy, crashed in qualifying, still comes away with 2 really good results and a slightly bigger championship lead, and not doing what we used to think Martin would do in those circumstances. We talk about what we'll look back on this weekend and remember. I can really see us looking back on this weekend in November and going, well, that was when Martin really proved that he's got rid of a lot of those rough edges. He can put together a title campaign. And Simon, you proudly put him top of your rider rankings on the race website and admitted there that there's weekends where Martin's absolutely dominated on raw pace, and you've given some guy who's finished 8th on a tugboat your top place, and Martin's been like 4th or something. But this was good from Martin, wasn't it, this weekend, in a very un-Martin way?
Yeah, I mean, it's unusual to see him having a tough weekend that doesn't end in the gravel trap. And I don't mean that as any ill will towards him, but normally a great weekend for him is winning 2 races, and a bad weekend is crashing out of at least one of them, probably from the lead. And he led on Sunday. He didn't crash. He got caught. He got passed. He didn't crash. He lost a single championship point in a weekend where he wasn't on the podium in a sprint race, which is.
Oh yeah.
I don't know the last time he wasn't. I don't know the last time he wasn't on the podium in the sprint race without crashing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen right now for Jorge Martin. So I think we saw a really sensible version of him this week, and a more sensible version than we've seen in a really long time. Super impressed with him. Yeah, he limited damage, which has not traditionally been. His trajectory is traditionally shoot ahead, score a load of points, and then suffer damage, not limit it. We're not really used to seeing limiting damage on a bad weekend, so without others crashing or something out of his control. So yeah, great job from him.
And completing our kind of trio of title fight stalemate tales achieved in quite interesting ways. Marquez scored 1 point fewer than Martin, so stays in much the same championship position, just 2 points behind Bagnaia in third. But again, Marquez had to come from absolutely nowhere on the grids to achieve those results. What is going on with Marquez and qualifying pace? Because Friday practice, he was fastest for a lot of the first session on Friday morning, but that wasn't the bit that really counted, was it? When he actually needs proper nail your Q2 place pace, that's not there at the moment. What's going on?
Well, that first session is when the grip is at its most crap, and when the grip is crap,
that's Marquez time,
Marquez
isn't
is
it?
The second clear of everybody else. Yeah, that's Marc Marquez time. And so it was totally unsurprising. I think also it was immediately clear that his pace longevity is going to be okay once again. He just clearly doesn't like this track very much, and just there's some part of the equation right now that isn't evening out single lap pace. If they knew it, they'd address it probably, but it's a matter of starting the weekend a bit leisurely, and I think not really prioritizing that, maybe not being used to prioritizing that single lap pace, because in the Honda time it was anyway dependent on who you follow in qualifying rather than
True.
rather than any actual concerted single lap effort. So I think it is a problem that just happens sometimes with some Ducati riders, doesn't it? We've seen Bagnaia have his patches where the single lap pace just went somewhere for some reason. Again, we've seen Johan Zarco be Ducati's worst qualifier last year. He's now Honda's best qualifier by a pretty considerable margin. Just, it's a tough world out there on a Ducati in terms of qualifying. The GP23 is also not as good of a qualifying machine as the 24 at this point. He got away with it. It's fine. He got away with it so much that, in the sprint, he was immediately in the mix right away just because he nailed the early going. And in the main race, he didn't, and it didn't really matter all that much anyway. And this is a track he doesn't like. He'll be fine. It was a fantastic salvage job. They need qualifying, obviously. They need it because you can't skate by on this to a championship challenge. But the mitigation was really impressive.
Just to jump backwards a little bit because I've done my research, Martin was last off the podium 15 sprints ago at this race at the end of last year whenever he got ran wide at by Miguel Oliveira. So yeah, Marquez did a really, really good job this weekend. I mean, how can he overtake on this bike whenever no one else can? It's wild.
Yeah,
no one else can make through in MotoGP bikes, and he just makes it look effortless. And it's not because of Marquez's aggressiveness, which is perhaps the craziest thing about it. It's not because he's shoving people out of the way. He's just really good at it. He's really, really good at especially not even using the brakes, but using the whole way he enters a corner, because you can overtake people who are really good at really good at braking really late, like Bagnaia and Martin. Obviously not this weekend, but looking back to Le Mans, and he's making it look really effortless. And I'm more and more of the opinion that I'm quite glad Ducati didn't give him a 2024 bike, because if they had, this championship would be pretty much sewn up by now.
He is right now. I think he is an Enea Bastianini who doesn't take a nap in the first laps. That is his current game. The qualifying's lacking, but the late race pace is unmatched. And you can win a lot on that. I'm not sure you can win a championship on that. That's my concern.
The difference is that Enea Bastianini has never been an excellent qualifier, and Marquez has 93 MotoGP pole positions. So it will come. It's there to be unlocked at some point.
Yeah, and just because it's happened twice in a row, it feels like there's a trend of Marquez going out in Q1 and having to come through the field. But we could get to Mugello next weekend. It's completely different. But also, go on, Val.
The part that surprised me is, he did also follow a rider in Q1, and it was his brother Aleix Marquez, who Marc says suggested it. Alex was like, yeah, just tow me, whatever. And he did, and then Alex out-qualified him. Just what a MotoGP nonsense, as usual. Very funny.
I have no idea why he made that decision.
Yeah, it didn't look like... I don't think he had the pace. I think he suspected he didn't have the single lap pace to do it without it, so it was sort of a bit of a Hail Mary. Yeah, Mark.
It's typical Marc fondness for Alex, thinking Alex was going to go quick enough to tow him into Q2, really, wasn't it? I don't think anyone else would have got...
Alex went quicker. I can't blame Alex too much. Alex did qualify him.
Yeah, but on the basis they're formed since they've been teammates at Cressini, you wouldn't back Alex to be the one who's got the pace to make something happen when Marc can't. Simon, you mentioned, isn't it lucky that Marquez isn't on a factory spec bike because you wouldn't see him? Well, this is something else where we had a few developments in the background this weekend. Ducati is said to be close to announcing who its 2025 factory lineup will be, but there's been a bit of a delay, and you've discovered that this is because it's trying to use Marquez to keep hold of Pramac effectively, which means our kind of plan A situation looks like Martin on the factory bike, Marquez being used to keep Pramac, Bastianini goes somewhere else. What's the latest?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I think that I'm increasingly thinking that Martin will be announced maybe even this weekend in Mugello and the days up to it as the new factory rider. I mean, he wants to be a factory rider, whereas Marc just wants a factory bike. They cannot afford to lose Martin, because imagine if he wins the championship this year, they don't give him the factory bike, he throws a huff, he goes to Aprilia and he runs Ducati's number 1 plate in the front of an RSGP next year. They cannot allow that to happen. So just give him the factory bike and be done with it. He's deserved it. No one can criticize the decision. It's not like they're doing it for any platitude or anything like that. The guy's leading the championship. Just put him in the factory bike. Be done. That then means they have to figure out what to do with Marc Marquez, who I think they have a little bit of holdover because he doesn't want to leave Ducati either. He's done 12 years in MotoGP and switched teams and bikes once. He doesn't want to do it twice in 2 years. And doesn't want to, have another season like we've just seen, where he's going to Q1 2 weeks in a row because he hasn't fully understood the bike in time attack mode yet. He wants to win titles, so he's going to stay with Ducati. But then what it all comes down to is he wants to be has to be on a 2025 spec bike next year. Ducati are contractually obliged to give 2025 spec bikes to Pramac next year, but Pramac are being courted by Yamaha, and Marquez doesn't want to go to Gresini, and Marquez knows those things. So I think we're seeing Marquez and Gigi Dall'Igna playing chicken a bit at the minute, where Marquez doesn't want to leave teams, so he's going to hold off as long as he can to stay in Gresini, knowing that if he does that, if Pramac goes to Yamaha, they'll get a factory bike. And Gigi is holding off and announcing anything for Marc, knowing that if he can offer Pramac Marquez's signature, they'll probably stay with Ducati and not go to Yamaha. And we're stuck in this stalemate. It's not a bad place to be for Ducati, because realistically they have a reasonable chance of winning it. They also have a reasonable chance of retaining both Marc Marquez and Enea Bastianini if it comes off. So, why not announce Martin right now? Get that bit out of the way, get that bit done, and then have a bit of time, maybe even over the summer break, to play with the other bit, knowing as well, let's be honest, that even if Yamaha, if Pramac do eventually go to Yamaha, if they can keep them guessing about it until September, it's 3 months less time for Yamaha to prepare for it. Why not? Just play the game right now.
So effectively, what Pramac is now considering is stay with Ducati, keep best bike, keep chance of winning championships, and maybe get best rider of his generation, still one of the top 3 on the grid, versus what's Yamaha offering? Massive bag of cash and some hope for a couple of years down the line. Has Yamaha got a chance of winning in that circumstance if Ducati's dangling Marquez?
Yeah, well, why not? I mean, KTM won Tech 3 over while having, a quote-unquote bike to offer them, I guess, and soon enough, the Tech 3 did with KTM what it did not do with Yamaha, which is win races. And now Tech 3 has Pedro Acosta.
Yeah, for now.
Wouldn't you like to have Pedro Acosta? Yeah.
And Tech 3 wasn't winning anything with Yamaha. It was looking like it should have done, maybe if Johan Zarco would stay upright, but it wasn't actually winning stuff. Yeah. Whereas Pramac's a champion team right now.
Yeah, but it's I think there's the reporting has been, like, I personally don't really know, but the reporting has been that there are reasons for Pramac to doubt its position as the certain 100% second in command team at Ducati longer term. Whereas at Yamaha, there would be no reasons to doubt that, and favorable financial terms and total partnership and all that noise. So it's about maybe reinforcing the business longer term versus glory right now, and it would be glory, obviously. So I can see why it's a dilemma. I mean, I would pick having Marquez and Ducatis every day of the week, but it's never that simple.
The other thing that kind of slipped onto the radar for a lot of people over the course of the weekend was Pramac announced a new special livery on Thursday night, which is obviously the reason why Martin wasn't on the podium in the sprint race, because special liveries are cursed. But they also announced at the same time that they were doing it to celebrate an extension of their contract with Italian insurance giant Prima, which takes them until the end of the 2027 season. So they've also got serious financial stability for the next few years with or without Marc Marquez. It's not like being given Marc Marquez is going to bring in a ton of new sponsorship money, because they've just sold the title sponsorship for 3 more years, which is a long time in MotoGP terms, without Marc. I would imagine that Prima haven't signed that deal without having a bit of a steer about what's happening at Pramac. They're bound to be aware of the Yamaha rumours. That actually leads me to think that a decision has already been made. And like I said, the fact that they signed a title sponsor without Marc means maybe they're thinking they don't need him for financial commitment, financial stability. And why not? You're fighting for a championship right now. You're leading a championship right now. Maybe new challenge. Why not? Maybe try something new. Maybe try doing it with a Yamaha instead. And maybe try doing it with super exciting young riders potentially, because there's a few names that, have been floated around that could end up with that team that would be really, really interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do think they're probably the deal that they signed, if there is no decision made yet, will have provisions. This is what we pay you if it's a Yamaha, and this is what we pay you if it's a Ducati. Or that it would be logical, at least. That's how I think we've had like an IndyCar court case in American open wheel racing, McLaren versus Alex Palou. Well, McLaren is claiming that a bunch of sponsorship agreements changed because he didn't come along, even though those agreements were already signed. So I mean, logically, something like that could or should be in place here. We'll see.
This episode is brought to you by Bai. It's Wonder Water. What makes Bai so great? It's simple. From Raspberry Lemon Lime by Sydney Sweeney to Zambia Bing Cherry and Palavo Pineapple Mango, Bai has antioxidants, electrolytes, and no artificial sweeteners. So for flavorful hydration, choose Bai. It's Wonder Water. Learn more about Bai and discover all of the exotic, bold flavors at drinkbai.com.
Greatness hurts. It's 10,000 hours of hard work, sweat, and setbacks. The aches, the stumbles, the falls. Tylenol provides pain relief for the champion in us all. It's the #1 doctor-recommended brand of pain relief and fever reduction. This summer, when greatness hurts, Tylenol will be there with care to help you keep chasing it. That's Tylenol. That's care without limits. Visit Tylenol.com/greatness-hurts to learn more. Use as directed.
One thing that did become clearer in the 2025 rider market at the weekend also is Simon's standout memory of the weekend. Aleix Espargaro is retiring, so there is definitely an Aprilia vacancy opening up. You'd assume it's only one, although Maverick Vinales was the other version of Maverick Vinales this weekend. Now, the assumption has been that whoever loses out at Ducati will end up in the Aprilia vacancy if one appeared, and that looks like being Enea Bastianini. Also, though, the other thing around Espargaro's retirement announcement, lots of emotion about that, but also at the same time it emerges that maybe he's not sticking around to complete the Aprilia fairy tale by being its test rider. So what is going on there? And did that temper the announcement a little bit, Simon?
It did a little bit, because there was a little bit of discord about it, because everyone kind of assumed he'd say, you know, I'm going to stay with Aprilia forever. And I think there was a few people a little bit unhappy about that, reading between the lines, because I think they kind of said, look, we're not going to talk about, Aleix said, we're not going to talk about the future this weekend, and then 45 minutes later talked about the future and dropped a bombshell about where he was going to be or not be. A slightly more cynical person from within the paddock pointed out to me that fuel for Lamborghinis isn't cheap, and that Aleix lives quite a rock star lifestyle, that, you know, going into retirement will probably be better suited with a decent test rider deal at, say, Ducati or BMW than it would be at Aprilia, because there's a bit more money to spend there. So I understand why he's floating his services to other manufacturers. I just think a lot of people would rather he didn't do it in the weekend, where he spent a lot of time crying about how sad it was to leave his Aprilia team behind, because it looks a bit cynical. On the other side of the garage, there's a rumor floating around that I've not actually seen a source for. I don't know where it came from, suggesting that Aprilia might actually lose both their riders because Maverick Vinales is interested in going to Honda, which would be kind of
madness on both sides, surely.
I mean, it's
just completely ludicrous.
It's just the inevitable conclusion of Honda's cycling through good but not great riders like Paul Espargaro and Jorge Lorenzo and Joan Mir, who, you know, want to be a Repsol Honda rider to say they've been a Repsol Honda rider, who want to get paid a gazillion amount of euros to do it, and who are going to achieve absolutely nothing whatsoever while they're in the process of doing it. I mean, if he thinks he's hit his level at Aprilia and that nothing's ever going to be better than what we've seen from him this year on a couple of occasions, and he's never going to win a title, and he's at the age he's at, then, you know, off you go to Repsol, and this weekend wouldn't have convinced anyone otherwise. And the alternative, you know, the plus side of it might be that we might get to see someone like Joan Mir come to Aprilia and be a bit more fired up and a bit more competitive. What is weird about the whole search for the new Aprilia rider thing right now is that, reading between the lines, it actually seems like Enea Bastianini isn't the favourite candidate anymore. and that Enea Bastianini's camp is doing quite a bit of work to try and keep him as the favourite candidate.
Yeah.
Whenever maybe people are presuming that, a Ducati satellite ride is more in line or whatever. The talk coming out of Aprilia is actually that it's Marco Bezzecchi that they want, which is a little bit surprising given his rather rocky start to the season. But you can excuse a lot of that away to the current Ducati GP23 not being as good as the 24 or the bike he was on last year, and him trying a bit too hard to make it better. And instead look to his 2022 season, 23 season, and try and sign him off the basis of that as a more fair representation anyway. But yeah, there's a surprising amount going on at Aprilia for a team that had looked to be in a fairly straightforward trajectory towards replacing Aleix whenever the not entirely surprising retirement rumour came along.
Well, firstly, Simon, I think you accidentally called Jorge Lorenzo a good but not great rider, which imagine if Claudio Domenicali did that back in the day.
Sorry. Post Yamaha Jorge Lorenzo.
No, I get you. I just imagined.
Yeah. No. Post Yamaha. I meant that in the context of after he left Yamaha.
I mean, the Vinales thing to me that part's just, I think, money negotiations coming around in public. I think Maverick Vinales loves nothing more than to dangle the idea of going to some MotoGP team that doesn't really exist during Aprilia contract talks, just to try to squeeze every single bit out. And he probably feels like they could compensate him better. Don't really think the move to Honda would accomplish anything for anybody except for making one person richer. The Bezzecchi thing, it's not surprising at all. Not even a little bit. If I didn't mention it out loud before, then I'm stupid, because certainly I've thought it. I've thought it a lot. It even in his current shape, there's just something. I really like Enea Bastianini, but I think Bezzecchi is less conceptually limited, is what I would say, and feels like a more natural fit to Aprilia, to its wants and its needs, as a rider who's more robust when it comes to mixed conditions. He's a rider who has that little bit in, that low grip, that part that, the Casey Stoner really likes, that control, that feel. He just, even with the bad start to the season that he's had, and this weekend it was actually really bad, but it's just, they already wanted him in the past once out of Moto2. He said no. I would go back to that well again, and I think it might be best for all parties if Enea Bastianini goes back on a satellite Ducati, and maybe like an older version, and gets to do some magic with some continuity, some really cool, really good races, and Marco Bezzecchi tries to spearhead Aprilia and make his fortune there, because I don't really know what his route at Ducati is to anything greater to what he already has.
Strange weekend performance-wise for Bastianini. Well, more unimpressive than strange, and then made even worse by him just ignoring penalty decisions in Sunday's race and doing it as a form of protest against stewarding that didn't exactly pay off, did it? Simon, you are one of the steward's strongest critics, but would you agree with how Bastianini approached this?
I am one of their strongest critics, but I think that Bastianini was exceptionally lucky to get away with the time equivalent for a ride-through penalty on Sunday, and he should either have been disqualified from the race afterwards, or he should be facing sanction at the next one, because you don't get to just ignore penalties you don't like. I get that he was peeved at having done it, but the other thing is, this whole being penalised for a shortcut is one of those things it's completely black and white. It's, to use an example from UK law, it's like drink driving. You're either guilty or you're innocent, and there is no leeway whatsoever in it. There is a little bit of mitigation in sentencing if it's not your fault. If you've been drinking all night in a pub, ordering non-alcoholic beer, and they've been getting you drunk without you knowing it, you're still guilty of drink driving. It's reflected in your sentencing that it's not entirely your fault. And that is what this penalty was. It's a black and white penalty where he gained an advantage that he would not have gained if the patch of asphalt that he ran over whenever he went wide had been gravel like it was in the old days. It's there to make things safer for riders, because gravel is not nice, but there has to be a corresponding effect if you want to. There doesn't have to be, but there is under the rules. There is, and he ignored that. I get that it's really, really hard to figure out if you've lost exactly a second or not. I get that the rules maybe should be a bit different. I think we strongly need to consider looking at a system where there is a dash message or something like that to tell you that you've not lost enough time and to give you a chance to correct it.
Yeah.
Maybe the it shouldn't be a long lap penalty that's cost you 2.5 seconds. It should be drop one place if the other rider that's in relation to you is right next to you. But he did it. That's the long and short of it. He did it. He didn't give back enough time. He is guilty of it. And I don't think that riding around ignoring penalties is a consequence for anything. At the end of the day, he didn't know what the penalty was for because it doesn't tell him long lap penalty for shortcutting. He could have jumped the start. There are other things that he could have been given a long lap for without entirely being aware of it. He didn't know that at the time. He ignored the penalty. If he'd stayed out, if this had happened a bit earlier in the race, if the timeline had been a bit earlier, and the next step after he'd ignored the ride-through penalty had been a black flag, but his bike had also started leaking oil all over the track at the same time, and he was ignoring the black flag because he thought it was for the penalty, what then? You just can't do it. So it's a silly way to protest the stewards.
Yeah, it is. I think, just to wrap it all around, I think this is the weekend that basically ended any idea of Enea Bastianini hanging onto the ride because he was not fast. He doesn't. Barcelona, you'd think, with the amount of tire chewing it does, would be okay for him, but it also chews the front, and he just doesn't like it on a MotoGP bike. He was actually a surprisingly great Moto3 rider in Barcelona, but MotoGP for some reason just no, it doesn't work. And that's part of the reason why Ducati won't keep him in that seat, because he's not robust enough over range tracks. But that's neither here nor there. I think I'm a little sympathetic as Simon is. I think as all of us are, because watching that replay after the long lap penalty came up, Alex Marquez dive bombs him and I guess leaves him a bit of room, but I can see why he cut the corner. He lost the position. It's not like he overcooked the corner. He didn't get to turn in for it. He probably made the smart decision to cut it and then got penalized by the track layout, because if he just ran off and returned, if it was two right-handers instead of a right and left, then he just, he runs off, he returns, nobody says anything. Even though he probably doesn't lose a different necessarily amount of time. He didn't lose even close to a second, as far as I can tell from the lap time readouts. I think he lost like half a second. Oh, of course you're going to get penalized for that, unless you expect him to lift it specifically because Alex Marquez pushed you off. I know it's a guessing game, I know it's annoying, but what can you do? And the overtake looked clean enough to me. He didn't get hit. He just decided to avoid contact. For me, it's a sign that there's just, again, and we've said this before, they're not afraid of the stewards. They do not reckon with them as a force. I think Enea Bastianini didn't just stay out in protest. I think he also stayed out because it was like, maybe I can convince those guys to rescind this penalty. Because there's no respect for their rule of law, because things just happen. And that to me is the problem. And I know it's a little bit annoying of me to make it like, it's actually about the stewards in a case where they basically didn't do anything wrong and officiated it the way they were going to officiate it. But it's just this blatant public show of disrespect, as we've seen in words before, but also now see in deeds. This is a legitimacy crisis, isn't it? And that for me is sort of the big takeaway.
That is true. Like that this is so different from what we saw in Jerez. Yeah, they've all merged into one already. This is not Johan Zarco getting thrown out of the stewards room for telling Freddie Spencer, I don't like you, which is one thing. This is actually on-track actions to penalise the stewards, which is totally different. It's an escalation, whether you want it to be or not. It's an escalation in absolutely mistreating the stewards, which is not something I'm entirely opposed to, because the stewards often deserve it. But this isn't the way to do it. There's a way to do it. It's also worth noting that Enea Bastianini was the deliverer of a hard pass, just like this one in Le Mans against Aleix Espargaro and didn't get penalised for that. So he did get penalised, but it's also because he shortcutted as a process of trying to do it. So I don't think he can demand that, certainly can't demand that Alex Marquez should have been penalised for the overtake attempt. And yeah, tough luck, son. You're reaping what you sow to an extent.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't like it. Don't like the way it was done.
No, in the end, you can have complaints about the stewarding, you can have things you want to question, but I don't think Bastianini did the cause any favours whatsoever by taking that kind of belligerent approach mid-race. It's ended up being self-defeating. So just 1 week to go until the next race at Mugello, and we're expecting maybe a Ducati announcement, probably an all Ducati fight for victory. We don't normally do any kind of preview stuff on the podcast, but there is one thing that we should look ahead to with Mugello, and that is that Yamaha had a test there that was very promising from what we understand. Yamaha did look a bit better this weekend. Honda we've covered in this episode by kind of laughing at the idea of Vinales going there, and I think that's all you need to say about Honda's performance at the moment. But Yamaha feels like it's getting somewhere. So Simon, what did Yamaha try at Mugello? How's it looking? And would you agree that Yamaha is actually showing real progress now?
So a very, very content Fabio Quartararo gave us really good breakdown of the Mugello test. Actually, not until Sunday night, until after a relatively decent weekend where he was 10th and 9th in the two races. His take on it is that Yamaha finally got to grips with the aero. They finally realised that aero is a thing that they need to work on, which has been something that they've been quite remiss on so far. And they're building him the bike that he wants, but he's very aware that you cannot just bolt on a new piece of aero and expect it to work right away. This is not, he used the example of he's tested 100 engines, frames and swinging arms, and he doesn't want to anymore because you slap it on, it works or it doesn't, that's fine, but aero needs more time. He wants to concentrate on aero because it takes half a day of working with a new set to really notice the difference, to notice where it's better, and to get used to it. And the kind of the example that he used to demonstrate was at Mugello they tried the 22 aero, and he hadn't thought that the 22 to 23 aero was a huge step until he tried the new halfway through 24 aero back to back with the 22 aero and was like, oh my God, that was rubbish. So he wants time to ride the bike. He's delighted that they've got concessions because the concessions directly mean that they have time to, on a non-race weekend away from everyone, to just do laps and get to understand these significant steps that the bike's making. Mugello was the first step in that. They tried a new aero package that he and Alex Rins both kind of hinted was worth like 0.2, 0.3 a lap. Like that much. A big, big change. It's not the final version, but it's a step in the right direction. It's something he's really, really happy about seeing. And basically, yeah, they're getting there. Slowly, they're getting there. After Mugello, they go to Valencia for 2 more days of testing. Yamaha are working hard. It's paying off for them. Fabio is happy, and Fabio is slowly getting quicker, as is Alex Rins, who actually made it to Q2 on Saturday as well.
Yeah.
Alex Rins made Q2 by towing a record lap of the circuit.
Irrelevant.
Fabio Quartararo did not make Q2 at all, even a little bit. Didn't come close.
Yeah,
I have never been moved less by anything than by Yamaha's current progress.
12 other riders
ever
could have towed a lap record lap, and they didn't.
Maybe, but look. Yeah, no, it looked better. I'll give you that. It looked like a better bike. It looked more competitive. It was 20 seconds off the win. Congratulations, mission accomplished.
Cynic.
Look, this is a race Fabio Quartararo won in 20 and 22. If this is what they're happy about, well, then there's going to be a lot of happiness before 2027, but not any actual silverware.
Love that. Yeah, so we haven't had vociferous disagreement in a little while, so I think this is a perfect place to round off Barcelona and come back to this in a week's time after Mugello, when we'll debate lots of things, including maybe a Ducati announcement, maybe the latest twists in the title fight, but most of all, I now want to debate what we think of Quartararo's probable 11th place in Italy and whether it's a great sign of hope for the future or something that's just going to disgust Val yet again.
I don't know what that was. I don't know where that came from. That concerns me a little bit.
You were moved by that. You described the Catalan Grand Prix weekend featuring Marquez coming from the midfield twice, featuring Bagnaia crashing out of the race in the last lap, featuring one of Martin's most intelligent performances ever, as a filler episode. And it's like, oh yeah, Simon's been a bit positive about Yamaha finishing somewhere. I'm going to get furious. Furious about that.
Oh, man.
So, listeners, we're going to leave it there before things descend any further. Thank you for your company this week. We'll be back with you with another post-race episode very soon, so we're straight off to Mugello. Thank you for your company after this one. I hope you enjoyed Barcelona. We're back in your ears this time next week.
The Athletic.